In this tutorial, I will be showing you how to do the Tunisian Purl Stitch. This swatch is a sample of the Tunisian Purl Stitch using a bulky weight number 5 yarn. And this is also a bulky weight number 5 yarn, and they're just different types of yarn, so that's why they look a little bit different, but these are the same stitch. These are both done with the Tunisian Purl Stitch. I have some other stitches worked up here just to show you how the Tunisian Purl Stitch looks compared to some of the other basic Tunisian stitches. So this is the Tunisian Purl Stitch here, and then the next part here, this is the Tunisian Knit Stitch, and this part here, these rows here, are the Tunisian Simple Stitch. So just shows you how they look different. This is the Tunisian Purl Stitch that I'm going to show you how to do in this tutorial today. I do have a tutorial on how to do the Tunisian Simple Stitch, and I also have a video tutorial on how to do the Tunisian Knit Stitch. You'll find the links in the description box below if you want to watch those video tutorials. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, and I will show you how to do the Tunisian Purl Stitch. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start off with a slip knot and create some chains because we need to do our foundation row. And the foundation row is going to start off the same as in the tutorial where I showed you how to do the Tunisian Simple Stitch. And the foundation row is also going to be the same as when you start off the Tunisian Knit Stitch. I'm going to start off with a slip knot. And for this tutorial, I'm just going to chain 8 chains. Okay, so I have my 8 chains, and I'm using a bulky weight yarn so you can see the stitches really easily. Then what I'm going to do, just like I did in the tutorial where I did the Tunisian Simple Stitch and the Knit Stitch, we want to turn our chain over and work into the back bumps of the chain, which is also sometimes called the spine of the chain. So we're going to pull up loops in these back bumps for our foundation row. So we're going to skip that very first chain. So we're not going to work into that first back bump. We're going to find the next back bump, put a hook into the back bump of the chain, and then yarn over, and we're going to pull that yarn over through, and we're going to leave the loop on the hook because we're going to do our forward pass for our foundation row. So when we do the forward pass, working from right to left, we're going to collect our loops. And then I'm going to find the next back bump, insert my hook underneath it, yarn over, pull up a loop, leaving the loop on the hook, find the next back bump, yarn over, pull up a loop. Next one, we're going to do that all the way down the chain, so just pulling up loops from the back bump. Yarn over, pull up a loop, find the next one, yarn over, pull up a loop, find the next one, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And there's one more. Okay, I'm going to insert my hook underneath that last back bump, the last chain, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Okay, so I have collected my loops for my forward pass for my foundation row. I started off with 8 chains, so I should have 8 loops on my hook. Okay, I have 8 loops, and that's what I want to have because you want to have the same amount of loops on your hook as you did chains. So we're ready to do our return pass. So we're going to start off the same way, just like I did in the tutorials for the Tunisian Simple Stitch and the Tunisian Knit Stitch. We're going to yarn over and pull through just one loop to begin the return pass. Okay, so now you're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops, and we're going to keep yarning over and pulling through 2 loops at a time until we have 1 loop remaining on the hook. So yarn over, pull through 2, 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 yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2. Now that completes the return pass for my foundation row. So you can see that the foundation row is exactly the same as the tutorial where I show you how to do the Tunisian Simple Stitch. And this foundation row is exactly the same as how I started the foundation row for the knit stitch. And you'll find that a lot of the Tunisian stitches will start off exactly like this with this foundation row. That's not the case for all Tunisian stitches. You know, as I teach you more stitches, then I will also show you, you know, any differences. But this is a standard, typical foundation row from a lot of stitches in Tunisian crochet. All right, now that we have our foundation row established, we are ready to begin the purl stitch. So this first loop that's on the hook does count as a stitch, and this vertical bar on the edge, we don't actually work into that one. That's in line with that, and that counts as a stitch. So that's our edge stitch. We do not work into that one. So now what we need to do is we need to bring the working yarn to the front of our work. So we're going to bring the working yarn to the front of the work, and the working yarn needs to be to the right of the vertical bar where we're going to work our purl stitch around. So this is the edge stitch here, and this is the next vertical bar after the edge. So we're bringing the working yarn to the front, so we need it to be before that vertical bar. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook underneath this vertical bar, very first one after the edge stitch. So you can see that the working yarn is now trapped between the loop that was already on the hook and that vertical bar where we just inserted the hook. So now what you want to do is you want to take your working yarn, and it's going to go under the hook essentially, and then yarn over. And then what I like to do is, you can see that's the working yarn there, so I'm going to pinch that working yarn down with my thumb while I pull this through. So I'm going to go ahead and pinch that working yarn right underneath the vertical bar with my thumb to hold it in place while I pull this working yarn through that loop or that vertical bar to complete my Tunisian Purl stitch. And there's my Tunisian Purl stitch. Now what you want to do is you want to take your working yarn and just pull on a little bit to adjust that purl stitch right there. So that way you can adjust the tension. Now we need to bring the working yarn to the front for the next purl stitch. So here's the next vertical bar right there. So we need to bring the working yarn to the front of the work, and the working yarn needs to be before the vertical bar where you're going to work your purl stitch. So it needs to be to the right of the vertical bar where we're going to work our stitch. So now we're going to insert our hook into that vertical bar. You can see we're inserting it just like you would if you were going to do a Tunisian Simple stitch, but the working yarn's to the front, so that's how we're going to end up with the purl. So then you take your working yarn, and it goes underneath the hook like that, and then yarn over. And then I'm going to pinch that working yarn underneath that vertical bar while I pull that working yarn through that loop. And then you just want to pull on your yarn to adjust your purl stitch down. And you want to try to get the purl stitches to have a somewhat even tension so they all look consistent. So now find your next vertical bar, which is right here. It's right there. So we need to bring the working yarn back to the front of our work. And you can see that the working yarn is to the right of that vertical bar. So it's just before the vertical bar where we're going to work our purl stitch. Insert a hook underneath that vertical bar. So you're inserting it just like you would if you were going to do a Tunisian Simple stitch, but this is going to be a purl stitch because the working yarn is in the front of the work. All right, then we're going to yarn over with that working yarn, holding that working yarn in place with my thumb. I'm going to pull that through. And that is my Tunisian Purl stitch. And then I'm just going to pull on that working yarn to adjust that purl down to the same tension to match the other purl stitches right there. So you can see little purls right there. And then I'm going to bring my working yarn to the front. It's just before the next vertical bar. So I'm going to insert my hook underneath the vertical bar. And then I'm going to yarn over with this working yarn. So I'm just going to go right under the hook and then yarn over, holding that yarn in place with my thumb. I'm going to pull that through to complete my purl stitch. And then I'm going to pull on the working yarn to adjust my purl to match the other ones. And then we need to bring the working yarn back to the front for our next purl stitch. See, there's 2 more vertical bars here before the edge stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook underneath this next vertical bar, and then yarn over, pinching that with my thumb to hold it in place underneath the vertical bar so I can pull that through. And pull on the yarn a little bit to adjust the purl stitch down. And then here's the last vertical bar of the row for this forward pass, because this is the forward pass. We're working from right to left, collecting our loops. And then here's the next vertical bar, so we need to bring the working yarn to the front again. The working yarn is to the right of my vertical bar, so it's just before the vertical bar where I'm going to work my purl stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook underneath that vertical bar, so you can see the yarn is right there before that vertical bar. Then I'm going to yarn over, pull the yarn over through to complete my Tunisian purl stitch, and then I'm going to pull the working yarn to adjust it. So now you can see that this last stitch is the edge stitch. For this edge stitch, we're not actually going to do a purl stitch. We're just going to work the edge stitch just like I did when I did the tutorial showing you how to do the Tunisian Simple stitch and how to do the knit stitch. So the edge stitch is going to be worked the same way, this last edge stitch. You want to make sure that you turn your work because you want to insert it underneath this loop and that second strand of yarn. So you just see that you can turn your work and you can see there's that loop plus that one behind it. So you want to make sure that when you insert it, you have 2 strands of yarn just like that for your edge. Yarn over, pull that yarn over, and that is your edge stitch. Now you can do a Tunisian purl stitch underneath that last part. It just depends what look you're going for, but since we started, you know, the edges will look nicer and more consistent if you work it this way, because you'll have the V stitches on the edge, on the bottom edge, and on the edges, and then when you cast off, all of the edges will look the same. So that's why it will look nicer if you're doing this. That way all your edges are the same. Now we need to do our return pass. We're going to work the loops off the hook, working from left to right. So when we work from left to right, working the loops off, that's our return pass. And for Tunisian crochet, you need a forward pass and a return pass to complete each row. So let's go ahead and begin our return pass. Yarn over, pull through 1 loop to begin your return pass. And then we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops at a time until we have 1 loop remaining on our hook. So yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. We're going to keep yarning over and pulling through 2 loops at a time. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. And now I have 1 loop remaining on my hook, so I have completed my return pass. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do another forward pass. We'll do another row to make sure you have a good grasp of how to do the Tunisian purl stitch. Okay, so we need to bring the working yarn to the front of our work, and the working yarn is to the right of the vertical bar where we're going to work our Tunisian purl stitch. So it's just before that vertical bar. I'm going to insert my hook underneath the vertical bar, and you can see that purl stitch is right underneath. So when you insert your hook underneath that vertical bar, you'll see that purl stitch from the previous row right underneath the vertical bar. So it's right underneath your hook. And then you're going to yarn over. So you're bringing the yarn underneath the hook and then yarning over. And then you're going to bring that yarn over through that loop that's on the hook. So I'm going to pinch the yarn with my thumb to hold that working yarn in place while I pull that loop through to complete my Tunisian purl stitch. And then I'm going to pull on the yarn to adjust my purl stitch down. So we're going to do that again. Bring the working yarn to the front. It's to the right of the vertical bar where I'm going to work my purl stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook underneath that vertical bar, and you can see the purl stitch from the previous row right underneath. And then I'm going to take the working yarn, yarn over, holding that yarn in place with my thumb, pulling that loop through, and then pull on the working yarn to adjust your purl stitch down. We just want to pull on the working yarn to get the purl stitches with the same tension so they look consistent. Then I'm going to bring the working yarn back to the front for my next purl stitch. Insert my hook underneath that vertical bar, Once again, you can see the purl right at the bottom. Then yarn over with the working yarn. Pull the working yarn through. I'm going to hold that working yarn in place right here underneath it while I pull that through. Then pull on the working yarn to adjust your purl stitch. Just trying to get the purls to look consistent and about the same, so that way they have the same tension. And then bring the working yarn back to the front. Insert your hook underneath the next vertical bar. And then yarn over. So you need to bring the yarn underneath the hook and then yarn over. Hold that working yarn in place. And then pull that working yarn through that loop that's on the hook. And that's your purl stitch. So you can see that purl, if you just leave it like that, it's going to be really loose. So you do want to pull on the working yarn to adjust it down. And then you can see we have 2 more vertical bars to work before the edge stitch. So I'm going to bring the working yarn to the front of my work. Insert my hook underneath that vertical bar. And then yarn over. Hold that working yarn in place. Pull that through. And then pull that working yarn to adjust my purl to match them up to the other ones. And then here's 1 more vertical bar before the edge. So bring the working yarn to the front of the work again to work our purl stitch. Insert our hook underneath that vertical bar. And then yarn over. Holding that working yarn in place with my thumb, I'm going to pull this through that loop that's on the hook. And that completes my purl stitch. And you can see it's really loose, so you do want to pull on the working yarn again to adjust it down so your purls look nice and consistent, or as consistent as they can be. And then here's your edge stitch. So the working yarn, we don't bring it to the front to work the edge stitch. We're going to insert our hook underneath both strands for the edge. So you might need to turn your work to get that second one. So you have 2 there. See how you have 2 strands if you insert your hook correctly for the edge stitch. Yarn over, pull that through, and that completes our forward pass. So when we work from right to left for our forward pass, we collect our loops. So now we need to work from left to right to work our loops off for our return pass. So just yarn over and pull through just 1 loop to begin. And then we're going to keep yarning over and pulling through 2 loops at a time until we have 1 loop remaining on our hook. So yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops again. Yarn over, pull through 2, and we have 1 loop remaining on our hook. So now we have completed our return pass. Now I'm going to go ahead and just work a couple more rows real quick, and then I will show you how to cast off. Okay, and just to show you something real quick, when you work your purl stitches and you bring the working yarn to the front, you can go like that. Insert your hook underneath the hook, yarn over, and pull up a loop. But once you're familiar with how to do the purl stitch and you've had a lot of practice with it, you don't actually need to sit there and bring the yarn like that every time. You don't actually need to pull it forward like that each time. What I do is, I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to start, I'll have the working yarn in the front. I'm going to insert my hook underneath the vertical bar. Yarn over, same way I just showed you, pull through, and then pull on the working yarn, and then just use your hook to scoop the yarn to the front, and then insert it underneath the hook, yarn over. So it's the same way, it's just instead of moving the yarn like that, you just scoop it forward with your hook and then insert your hook underneath the vertical bar. And if that seems tricky to you, you can just bring it to the front each time. Okay, I'm going to do a quick return pass, and then I'll show you what I mean again with the forward pass and scooping the yarn to the front for the purl stitches. I mean, because it does the same thing, so I just showed you, you bring your working yarn to the front, and it is always going to be to the right of your stitch that you're going to work. And then yarn over, pull through, and then pull on the working yarn to adjust. what I mean is you just use your hook to kind of scoop it to the front. So you can see that it's basically right there in the front of the work that way. So your working yarn is still going to be just before that vertical bar that you're going to insert the hook underneath. Then yarn over, hold that in place. So you'll find as you get used to it, you'll be able to just scoop the yarn forward. And it is going to be before the vertical bar still. And it'll make it go faster for you. So once you've practiced it, you can try it that way. So I mean, it's doing the same thing. It is still bringing it to the front. It's still before the vertical bar that you're going to work. It's just easier if you scoop it to the front and then insert your hook. So, you can see that it's definitely not to the back of the work. When you do it, you just scoop it to the front and you insert your hook underneath the vertical bar, yarn over, still, pinching it with your thumb to pull it through, and then pull on the working yarn to adjust your purl, scoop the yarn to the front that way. So you can still see that the working yarn is to the right of the stitch before the vertical bar you're going to work. It's still to the front because if you drop it down, you can see it's in the right place. It's just easier if you scoop it forward, I think. It makes it go faster. Once you, do this over and over again, you'll find you can just scoop it to the front. And then insert your hook underneath the vertical bar. And then you're still, yarning over. But it goes right under the hook and over. And then holding it down with your thumb still. Pull that through for your purl stitch. Then I'm just going to scoop it forward. Just makes it go faster, I think. I mean, you don't have to do it this way. Definitely you can do it the first, how I showed you in the first few rows. I mean, it's still in the right place because see, if you drop it down, it's still the same place. It's just easier if you do it that way. And then you're going to yarn over. You're still yarning over the same way. It goes underneath the hook and over, holding it down with your thumb. Then pull on it to adjust your purl. And then we work the edge stitch the same way, working underneath both strands for the edge. Yarn over, pull through. Okay, so there's our forward pass. I'm going to do the return pass real quick. Now that we have several rows of the purl stitch, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to cast off. You want to bring your yarn forward, insert your hook underneath the very first vertical bar, yarn over just like you would for the Tunisian Purl Stitch, pull that through. So we're doing a purl stitch just like we did in the previous ones, but this time then you're going to pull through that loop that's already on the hook, and then bring your working yarn to the front again, do another purl stitch same way we did the other ones, yarn over, work your purl stitch, and then pull the yarn to adjust your purl down, and then just slip that right through that loop, bring the working yarn to the front, do another purl stitch same way, then adjust your working yarn, pull it through that loop that's already on the hook. So you can see we're just slipping the stitches off now to do our, so now we're casting off, and then bring that working yarn to the front. You can either scoop it like that or bring it to the front like that. It's the same thing. It's got to bring it to the front either way. Insert your hook underneath the vertical bar to do your purl stitch, and then slip that through that loop that's already there, and then bring your working yarn to the front. You can either scoop it or bring it to the front, as long as it's before that vertical bar. Yarn over, and then do your purl stitch, pull your yarn to adjust your purl, and then slip it through that loop that's already on the hook, and then one more vertical bar. So you can either scoop it forward or bring your working yarn to the front. It's going to put it in the right place either way. Insert your hook underneath that vertical bar, yarn over, pull through to do your purl stitch, pull the yarn to adjust your purl stitch, and then pull that through that loop that's already on the hook, and then just insert your hook for the edge stitch underneath both strands on the edge, then yarn over, pull that through for the edge stitch, and then pull that through the loop that's already on the hook, And that completes the cast off. And that is how you cast off. And that's casting off purl stitch wise. Okay, so we have finished our swatch for our Tunisian purl stitch. I hope that you enjoyed the tutorial on how to do the Tunisian purl stitch today. If you'd like to watch some of my other Tunisian crochet tutorials, I'll have an iCard in the corner that you can click on that will bring you directly to those tutorials, and there'll be links in the description box below that will bring you directly to those tutorials. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.